Okay, what did we say the other two components of the posterior chain were? Hamstrings, glutes, and adductors, right? Hamstrings, glutes, adductors. All right? This is the bar position. Bar position relates to our explanation of why of the hamstrings role in the movement. The other parts of it relate to stance. Okay? When we stand in our low bar back squat, in our version of the exercise, we're going to take a stance width that is about heel at shoulder width. Your heels are about shoulder width. About like this. Draw a line down from my shoulders straight down to the floor, and you'll see that this distance is about the same as my shoulder width. Now, we don't really care about the shoulder width, but the shoulder width in most proportionate humans is a good proxy for hip width. Right? Most people are not narrow-shouldered and wide hip. So from our standpoint, if we're dealing with relatively proportionate humans, this is the approximate stance we'll take. That may need some fine-tuning. But just to eyeball things in a broad, sweeping manner, we're going to take about a shoulder width stance. And we're going to take our toes and we're going to point them out at about 30, 35 degrees. Wider than most people would like to point their toes when they squat. Because most people have a picture in their mind when they squat of the bodybuilder squat where you just use your quads. That comes from body part thinking. We don't think about body parts. We want to work the whole thing. So we're going to place our feet in a position here that allows us to use all of the muscles of the hips, posterior chain, quads, everything else. More muscle mass being used, right? Now, the active hip concept was introduced in that article, and it is analogous to the active shoulder. We want to specifically shrug our traps up at the top of the press in order to support the load overhead with our traps. The position of the bar over the scapulus has got to be vertical because we don't want that moment arm in between the two, right? Well, the active hip is kind of like that, okay? If we actively seek to use as much of our hip muscle mass as we can when we squat, we can be stronger to do it. So, let's investigate the role now of these muscles as they contribute to the squat. We all did that little experiment in the chair where you took your feet, let's do it again, point your feet straight ahead. Okay. Now get kind of the weight off of your toes. Now externally rotate your femurs. And I want you to feel what muscle groups contracted there. And feel that in your external rotators, up here on the sides of your hips. If we shove our knees out when we squat, we're externally rotating. We're activating our glutes when we do that. And all of the other external rotators of our hips. If we initiate the squat from this position, like that, by shoving our knees out, that's what we do, right? The shoving out of the knees calls all of this stuff into contraction. Now let's look at this. The reason I'm hesitating there is because what I'm about to do is really going to look stupid on this guy's camera right here. Okay? I want you assholes to be nice to me. I'm going to approximate the insertion point of my adductor longus right here on my distal medial femur. All right? Now I'm going to approximate the attachment point, the origin of my adductor longus back here on my ischial tuberosity. All right? Now I want you to watch very quickly and very carefully what's going to happen as I squat down. What happens to that distance between those 2 points? It increases, doesn't it? And as I come back up, it decreases, right? Do you see the action of the adductors? It shortens in concentric contraction as I come up out of the squat. It lengthens in eccentric contraction as I go down to the bottom of the squat. As I lean forward, the ischial tuberosity, since my pelvis is locked into my low back, kicks back, further stretching out my adductors and my hamstrings. Since the adductors cross the hip joint, and since they shorten as the hip extends, then the adductors are extending the hips and are therefore in the posterior chain, those muscles that extend the hips. What enables them to effectively do that? The action of the external rotators keeping the knee out. If the knee stays out, the adductors can effectively stretch and then contribute. These things anchor the femur in external rotation, thus allowing the adductors to stretch out in eccentric contraction and shorten in concentric contraction to contribute to hip extension. Everybody with me? Now what happens if this occurs? If you drop your knees in when you squat. We've all had clients that did that chronically, haven't we? What are they doing? Well, they're not using their external rotators to keep their femurs in external rotation. Furthermore, they don't get to use their adductors to contract and help with the hip extension because they never get stretched out into a position where they can contract. Right? In fact, if you tear a groin muscle, you can squat during rehab by taking a close stance, keeping your feet pointed forward, your knees pointed forward, taking the adductors out of the movement. But what do we want to do? Once again, we want to involve as much muscle mass as we can in the exercise to train it more so we can get stronger, lift heavier weights, develop more muscle in our strength program. So we want to specifically select a stance and a knee position that engages all of that muscle mass. So we point our knees out, right? Any questions about that?